Hi, I'm Faith McCann, and I've been a witch for over 40 years. And no, we are not evil. Learn more about the magical world and how the magical world affects your world right here on The Magical Alternative. And you don't have to be a witch to watch. Hello, and welcome to The Magical Alternative. I'm your host, Faith McCann. Hello, November Sound. We missed you last month, so welcome back. Hello, crew of The Magical Alternative. Thank you so much. And welcome to August. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. We have a really great show for you tonight. We'll be discussing Thanksgiving, Lughnasadh, bread, as well as cryptids, myths and legends of Connecticut, and a very interesting, fascinating man from years ago, the Leatherman. So thank you so much, and let's get on with our show. Hi, I'm Faith McCann, the host of The Magical Alternative. I really hope you've been enjoying our show. Have you checked out the other interesting, entertaining, and informative shows here at Community Voice Channel? Local government, religion, and entertainment right here in your home or on your personal digital device. Well, public access television is in danger of being canceled. I know, that's right. Government funding is being cut, and we want to continue giving you the shows that you enjoy. You can show your support by scanning this QR code with your smartphone and make any size donation. All donations go to keep your favorite shows coming to you every month. We thank you for your support. Well, tonight we are discussing Thanksgiving, Lughnasadh, and bread. Thanksgiving, what? Well, it is our Sabbath, Lughnasadh. That is our Thanksgiving. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. Lughnasadh is not just a spoke on the wheel, but it is a wedge, a season, if you will. And August 1st is our first food harvest. Now, we have a wheel of the year. I'll demonstrate for you here, where it has the various segments of our Wheel of the Year. So let me see where Lughnasadh is. Here it is right here. And each segment is one of our 8 Sabbats around the Wheel of the Year. It's our agricultural Wheel of the Year. And our first food harvest, Lughnasadh, the ancient people of Ireland and Western Europe celebrated this Sabbath or celebration, and it became their Thanksgiving for the first grains of the field. All of our Sabbats are part of our Wheel of the Year, and it's an agricultural wheel from planting to growing to harvesting to resting to planning to plant again. It's typical to celebrate this Sabbath outdoors with a huge Thanksgiving dinner on a long table with friends, family, lots of food, any kinds you like. And yes, it can be a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. Breads need to be dominant this particular Sabbath. Now, Lughnasadh, what does this stand for? It's a Celtic word, or actually a Gaelic word from the ancient Celts, which means assembly or games of Lugh. Some pagans have chosen its Christianized name of Lammas or loaf mass, and that came about 800 CE. Face it, every ancient culture, religion, race of people held bread as sacred and as a symbol of the abundance of the gods. So who was Lu? He was a Celtic god of the harvest, warfare, light, crafts, skills, artistry, and healing. Lu is also associated with the sun, summer storms, is often depicted as a youthful, handsome warrior. His epithets include Samilda Nach, skilled in many arts, and Lamfada, which means long-armed. Lughnasadh is our Sabbath of the first food harvest. So imagine, if you will, our wheel of the year. And on November 1st, Samhain is when the last food is put away for the winter. It's the last food harvest. So if your village or tribe was lucky and you had no vermin, no storms, no attacks on your village, no mold or spoilage of the food, if there was enough food for everyone, your food stores would need to last until the next August 1st, 9 months away. For centuries, millions of people, they simply couldn't go out and hunt. Because a lot of people have said to me, why didn't they just go out and hunt? Well, not if a king or a lord owned the land. Many times it was too far inland to walk to the ocean or the river to fish. And if the lord who owned the water restricted who could fish and who owned the fish once caught, it wasn't a guarantee your family would eat that night. Even bird eggs from nests in trees were considered the lord's who owned the land. Everyone not in the royal court was a peasant, and peasants planted the fields. This was the era where many of our Sabbath's origins began. There was no middle class. You were expected to give upwards of a third or more to the lord or king of your harvest as rent, and a tenth of what was left to the church. And then you could keep what was left, and that had to keep your family or your village alive for 9 months. Now, the king's lord of the manor, the landlord, determined if the amount the peasants gave was the correct amount, or if they felt the king had been slighted and the peasants needed to give more. And no one could argue with the king's representatives. So you might end up with a lot less than you had planned for to get you through the winter and the spring and early summer before you could harvest grains again. The people waited for the first harvest, the Sabbath of Lughnasadh, the harvest of the grains, hence the bread, until it came. So after the winter thaw, the only supplements to a boring, molding diet of ever more stale grain, dried meats, root vegetables, and cabbage, and more cabbage, was in the spring and early summer. The people would scour the fields, woods, waysides, and their own small garden patches for herbs, chives, small onions, roots, berries, small fruits, cherries, strawberries, mulberries, raspberries, bilberries, and gooseberries to survive on. Now, this was in feudal Europe, so we didn't have cranberries and blueberries, and a lot of the fruits and vegetables we're familiar with in North America. And you had to get up pretty early to pick the berries before the birds got their share. Now, wild gathered honey, if you were brave enough to battle a wild bee's nest to try and gather some and suffer the stings, could make your food a little bit more palatable. And it depended on the region if you would be allowed to keep your hard-fought gains, or would you have to hand over the honey to the lord of the manor. Mead production, which was honey wine, was a royal endeavor, with royal monasteries being in charge of all mead making. So many times, even if you collected wild honey, you were expected to turn it over to the monks. Bee skeps or hives were kept, and the honey was collected by the monks. Bigger fruits like apples, pears, quince, peaches, and larger vegetables such as turnips and cabbage were mainstays in feudal European diets. These were harvested later in the season toward fall, our holidays of Mabon and Samhain. And bread became the star of the daily diet. Sometimes it was all one would eat throughout the week, from fresh baked breads to stale bread that was softened in stale mead or beer. And bread also found itself a strong focal point in most mainstream religions at the time. From the sacred matzah that sustained the Jewish people through the Exodus and is still representative today of their struggles, to the many sects of Christianity that use either a cracker or bread as the host in their communion services. Bread has been used as a focal point and has been kept elevated and considered sacred and special for centuries. So whether bread represents one thing to you and another thing to someone else, bread goes back to ancient times. How ancient? I'm glad you asked. The oldest evidence of bread created by humans comes from a site in northeastern Jordan in the Levant. It is 14,400 years old, and doing the math quickly, that goes back to the year 12,375 BCE. Now, this bread found in the Black Desert was considered or is believed to have been made by Natufian hunter-gatherers before the advent of agriculture. It's believed they likely ground wild wheat and club rush tubers into flour, mixed it with water, and baked it in a fireplace or on a hot stone. So when you eat a bit of bread this summer, two things to remember. You are eating what is considered one of the oldest man-created foodstuffs we are aware of. And two, if you're going to eat bread, make sure it's good bread. And for centuries, this is what bread looked like. The concept of having a yeast and having leavened bread, it was a very long time, thousands of years, before we ended up with bread that looked like this. So this was very common. The pita type breads that we're familiar with in the Middle East were very common to eat. And if the idea of celebrating Thanksgiving outside in warm weather with friends, family, a turkey, all the fixings sounds nice, then do it. It is. It's a blast. Because of all the stories that we hear of the first Thanksgiving the Pilgrims had here in North America in 1621 with the indigenous peoples, the one thing that seems to always get pushed to the back of the story, and it really should lead, is that Thanksgiving that year was late. And it wasn't the first Thanksgiving ever. Harvest Thanksgiving celebrations had been celebrated for centuries in Europe. But it was their first Thanksgiving having arrived on these shores, having survived a treacherous and dangerous deadly sea crossing, that without the help and aid of the native indigenous peoples, the white Europeans would not have survived. So get out your long tables, your chairs, your turkey, stuffing, pies. Yes, pumpkin was served, but more of a mashed squash dish rather than pie. And they had very little sweeteners except wild honey and maple sugar syrup here in North America. Also, if you want traditional, serve up some whitefish, trout, venison, pheasant, duck, quail, and some tasty groundhog. I'm going to pass on the groundhog, but you can have it if you'd like. They also had nuts, berries, this is in North America, dried meats like jerky, pemmican, corn, which is maize, the corn we're familiar with, cranberries, blueberries here, squash, lobsters and clams, goose, swan, carrots, parsnips, turnips. Their bread was made with corn, today's cornbread, and pemmican. If you heard that word and are not familiar with it, pemmican was a Native American dish where they would take dried venison or bison, and then they would powder it and then add liquid fat from one of the animals. And then they would mix dried berries such as blueberry or cranberries, and they would make a type of very nutrient-dense granola bar. Sometimes they'd add nuts to it, and it would be a survival item that you could pack with you. You could carry long distances. It didn't need any kind of refrigeration. It didn't spoil. At a time where they didn't have refrigeration really, except in the winter time, it would last a very long time, and a small amount could keep you going for a very long time with the calories it had. So pemmican, some people say today when they make it, they really love the flavor. Other people say it's greasy and gamey. You can find recipes online if you'd like to try to make some yourself. In 1621, they also made large vats of stews and soups for this Thanksgiving dinner, filled with seafood and vegetables. Feasting in celebration of the harvest has long been a tradition no matter what time in history. So happy Lughnasadh. And if you've never celebrated Thanksgiving in August, give it a try because it's great. It's a lot of fun. And you have more than enough room for the whole family. And now we have November Sound with Summertime. Give them a hand, everyone.
Daddy and Mammy standing by. Thank you.
And that was Summertime, November Sound. All right. Next up, we're going to discuss cryptids, legends, and spooky Connecticut. This topic, cryptids, legends, and spooky Connecticut, we're going to cover a few things. Cryptids, legend and lore, and ignorant rumors. The first one I'm going to get out of the way, ignorant rumors. There's a lot of YouTube videos on creepy Connecticut. They discuss everything from ghosts and hauntings, the spooky roads, creepy cemeteries, and unfortunately, things that are intermingled in there quite unfairly. And I was surprised to find stories about real human beings that have been demonized over the years by cruel, ignorant bullying. For instance, if you are interested in these types of stories, I'm going to give you a warning. There are no such things in Connecticut, such as Danbury frog people, melon heads, or faceless people in the woods of Connecticut. And no photos will accompany these short descriptions out of respect for the actual human beings that are being discussed. Serious research points to these legends starting around the time in the 1800s. One of the first stories that a group of Melungeon people, which was a mixed race group of settlers from the Appalachian regions of the United States, they moved into our region in the Willimantic, Danbury, and surrounding areas. Their ancestry was a beautiful combination of European, African, and Native American. They had darker skin and hair with lighter eyes. They were often categorized as free people of color, yet they still experienced social and legal limitations and prejudice. There were also other individuals in our state's history, as in other states, that were born deformed due to lack of prenatal medical care, which was non-existent, no effective birth control, and other tragedies, accidents, and diseases, also those due to lack of vaccines, which left survivors horribly disfigured. Sadly, these people were either locked away from polite society at home or placed in asylums where they were often further abused. There are reports that at the time there were breakouts, and these poor, desperate people just looking for a safe place escaped these asylums. And the stories of these people would grow more and more fantastical, of them living in the woods and terrorizing people, attacking people, until children were threatened by their parents that if they weren't good, these monsters would come and get them at night. Some of these stories still remain today and are told by those who don't realize that they're spreading rumors of intolerance and othering. There are no melonheads, faceless people, or frog people, or other crazed people living in the woods of Connecticut. Telling these tales around the campfire is beneath anyone who does so. There are better tales to tell. Let's talk about witches. Real people, but were they witches? Now, we are, but let me tell you a story that my father used to tell me when I was little, and there's very little written down about this person, and I would like to give her a little bit of press. Sally Salem. My father always told me this story when I was little, when we would drive from my hometown of Colchester down through Salem, Connecticut, and we would go down Witch Meadow Road, and he would point out to this field. There was nothing in the field except grass, and he would say, "That's where this witch used to live, Sally Salem." And as a little girl, I'd be looking out the back window, and I would just frantically be looking. There was nothing there, but I would always look, thinking that maybe I would see something, maybe, I don't know, ruins of a home or something I would see, but never did. And they say that this is why Witch Meadow Road was named after her. I have looked, and recently I found a reference to a toothless old woman. This was written in 1969 by David Hazard Wardell. He wrote a historical sketch of Salem that was published, and it is found on the internet now. And it is 3 or 4 pages about the history of Salem, Connecticut. But this one bit here, quote, presumably there were never any witches in this particular Salem, except for possibly a toothless old woman giving Witch Meadow and ultimately the road its name. It is believed that this town did take its name from Salem, Massachusetts, when Colonel Samuel Brown, 1669 to 1731, of that town purchased this land in Salem, Connecticut. So interestingly, though, there are no curses or bad things that happened because of Sally Salem. So she has all but faded out of local memory. My father remembered those stories when he was a young boy. He was born in 1934 in Colchester, Connecticut. And he was told stories by those, that had lived there much longer than him. And she was most likely an old single woman who lived alone and was therefore considered a witch. And isn't it sad that one needs to be thought of as evil or notorious for one to remember you if you are a witch? Well, there was another woman, Hannah Hovey, who was later named Hannah Cranna, the Witch of the Hills in Monroe, Connecticut. Sadly, as the above story with Sally Salem tells us, if you are not known notoriously, you are barely remembered. Hannah, on the other hand, was rumored to have asked for help 2 days in a row from 2 different people who rejected her pleas. Apparently, the first to refuse had their home burned down, and the second suffered some sort of malady. Hannah's last request, she asked that the town people, that when she passed away, to walk her casket to the cemetery to bury her. If not, she warned that she would haunt them evermore. They didn't, finding it easier to put her on the cart, only to find the casket kept falling off the cart. It is rumored that at least once a year, a car swerves to avoid a woman in the road and crashes into her stone in the cemetery. I did not look any deeper to see if that really was a true story, but that's what they say in Monroe. Earlier, we mentioned cryptids and myths. Firstly, cryptids are fantastical, legendary creatures, animals, beasts that are not real, that people have created from old folk tales and superstitions. 2 of my favorite areas of study. Some go back over centuries, and yes, some people absolutely believe these to be true. There are no actual indisputable scientific proof that a cryptid exists. Some examples, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Mothman. So are there cryptids in Connecticut? The first one I'm going to talk to you about is the Black Dog of Hanging Hills in Meriden, Connecticut. Over the Quinnipiac River Valley, a spectral dark hound has been seen for over 100 years haunting the hanging hills of central Connecticut. Now, there is a favorite place people love to go to called Hubbard Park, and it's Castle Craig in Meriden, where many visitors have gone for picnics and to spend the afternoon, and they've reported seeing the black dog. It is reputed that should a man see it once, it's only men, not women. Apparently, women either don't see it or it doesn't affect women. But it is reputed that should a man see it once, it will be for joy. If that same man shall see it a second time, it will bring sorrow. If it is seen by that man a third time, that man shall soon die. It is fortunate that those that report seeing the black dog only report seeing it once. There have been a few gentlemen in the past that have reported seeing the dog for a third time, and then shortly thereafter, they were hikers and they had tragic accidents and they fell to their death in that area. But Recently, there hasn't been any deaths reported. It is reported to be a short-haired black dog of moderate size with nothing particularly notable about its appearance, yet there are two notable signs which stand out whenever men have sighted this spectral canine. One, men have seen it bark, yet it makes no sound, as if barking behind a soundproof wall of glass or air. Two, it leaves no footprints behind, either in the dust or mud of summer or spring and fall, or in the snow of winter. The legend and lore of black dogs as warning omens, protector spirits, or even harbingers of death and destruction have been found in ancient mythology from ancient Britain, Wales, Belgium, and Germany. And many people brought their beliefs to the New World. But was it just their beliefs they brought with them across the seas? Another cryptid we have in Connecticut is the Lordship mermaids off the coast of Stratford. Since the 1800s, there have been sea captains' reports of a mermaid or mermaids off of Lordship, which is a section of land near Stratford, Connecticut. Now, this has been capitalized upon by the late P.T. Barnum when he used a fake creature that was put together with glue and parts of various skeletal parts from small animals and sea creatures to resemble something hideous and unrecognizable. Hence P.T. Barnum's mermaid, the Fiji mermaid to be exact. But let us remember P.T. Barnum was attributed with the quote, "There's a sucker born every minute." But some people still report sightings of mermaids off the coast of Lordship, Connecticut, as recently as last week. From the taping of this show, there were some sightings, which is kind of cool. So go to Stratford, drive past the Sikorsky Memorial Airport, and the beach is right there. A nice drive if you want to go mermaid sighting. Then we have Downs Road in Hamden, is reputed to have a Bigfoot-like creature living there. And Dracula Drive in Trumbull, Shelton, has a long history of spooky and supernatural activities, but mostly recounted by teenagers after long nights out partying and trying to scare one another with I Dare You To games. Now, Dracula Drive is not an actual name of a road. It is something that is known to locals. So you're not going to find it on your map or with your GPS, but if you live in the area, someone could tell you where it is. And again, it just seems to be teenagers that like to scare one another. The next I'm going to talk to you about is the infamous Dudleytown in Guilford, Connecticut. Nicknamed the Village of the Damned. Save your time and please don't go there. The residents would appreciate your not making a pilgrimage out. There's nothing there. I have been there myself personally, and I can assure you there is nothing there. Now, yes, way back when there had been some supernatural activity, even recorded on film by a television crew back in the 60s, but in the 1970s, a hurricane came through and knocked down a long line of trees that had been planted by the colonists way back when. And they had obviously been acting as some sort of recording device for this activity, as nothing has happened since. The history of Dudleytown is sad only in the fact that the original settlers came to this remote, far-flung area of Connecticut, settled here, and then when large cities such as New York City, Boston, Springfield, Hartford sprung up, it was miles away and many hours to travel. Any highways put in were as far away as they could be. So young people grew up, moved closer to civilization, and what was once a small town became a forgotten village and then an abandoned tract of land. Now, the original curse is kind of interesting because this is what the whole reputation of this haunted village of the Dam rests upon. They claim that the founder of Dudleytown, Gideon Dudley, was somehow cursed because his father was beheaded for treason by Henry VIII. It simply doesn't hold water. Firstly, the town was founded by a gentleman named Thomas Griffiths, It wasn't until over 200 years later that a Dudley ever stepped foot on these shores, 200 years after Edmund was beheaded by Henry VIII. And in those days, who wasn't beheaded by Henry VIII? I mean, he beheaded people like people ghost people today. I mean, it was every day he was beheading people. So the story goes, Edmund and another fellow, Sir Richard Empson, faced charges of constructive treason. Well, constructive treason in those days basically meant they were fabricated charges, claiming that these two conspired to take charge of the throne on Henry's death. They were scapegoated, though, because Henry VIII ordered their executions to gain public favor and demonstrate a clear break from his father's less popular policies. The thing is, Henry passed away, and these two remained in prison for almost a year before they were put to death. And if there was some kind of curse which followed Edmund's descendants down after his execution, it was a pretty weak one, because Gideon Dudley was not the son of Edmund, but he was the great-great-great-great-grandson of Edmund Dudley, 5 generations hence. In that time, the Dudleys had achieved great status in the royal court of Great Britain. One became the Duke of Northumberland, Lord High Admiral, Protector of Lords, and a favorite of both Edward VI and Queen Elizabeth I. A cursed family would not be allowed so close to the royal family. And yes, the royal family believed in all things supernatural, as Queen Elizabeth had on her staff her personal philosopher, Dr. John Dee. He was an English mathematician, astronomer, teacher, astrologer, occultist, and alchemist. He was the court astronomer and personal advisor to the Queen. I have personally been to what is left of Dudley Town. There is no hauntings, no spirit activities, nothing left behind. Just a quiet, normal forest with birds, small animals scampering about, and that's it. Not a shred of any supernatural energy. It can burn off, you know. And the residents just want to be left alone. But if you want to go and see something possibly haunted, have you heard of Gardner Lake in Salem? Again, Salem, Connecticut. Well, there's a phantom pianist that still plays there. Yes. Bill might like this one. It's located in Salem, and in the 1890s, at the turn of the century, okay, this is, I think, the craziest part of the story. It was a common thing to move houses and other large buildings, to pick them up, put them on a trailer, and move them. Huge buildings. Those that understand engineering and architecture probably understand why that is not as common an activity today. Well, one frigid day in the winter, a family wished to move their summer home from one side of Gardner Lake to the other. They felt sliding it across the frozen pond would be a bully idea. So they started doing this, and apparently the men got tired and said, well, you know what? Let's leave it here in the middle of the pond and call it a day. We'll come back tomorrow. Also a great idea to leave everything inside. Why pack up just to have to unpack? Just leave everything inside where it was. So calling it a day, everyone went home to reconvene the next day. Imagine their surprise when they came back the next day and found out the house had broken through the ice and was listing half in and half out of the water. So the men tried to retrieve as many items as possible, but a large piano inside the home was too heavy to move out of the sinking home safely. It went down to the bottom of the Gardner Lake with the rest of the home and is on the bottom to this day. While no one was injured or killed in this event, over 100 years later, people still say they hear piano music drifting up from the depths below, a haunting melody of a piano which has yet to play its last sonata. Connecticut is home to amazing history, legend, lore, rumors, and things that go bump in the night. It's up to you what you are going to believe. Now we have November Sound with Superstition. Yes.
superstitions, writings on the wall, very superstitious, ladders built you fall. 13-month-old baby, I broke the looking glass. 7 years of bad luck, the good things in the past. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. Very superstitious, wash your face and hands. Very superstitious, do all that you can. Keep me in a daydream, keep me going strong. You don't understand me, sad is my soul. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. Very superstitious, nothing more to say. Very superstitious, the devil's on his way. Keep me in a daydream, keep me going strong. You don't have to say when you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. No, no, no. No, no, no.
And that was November Sound with Superstition, perfect for today's topic. To finish up, I'm going to tell you a fascinating story, and it's not a myth. He was not a monster, and it is not legend or lore, but it is a real story about a real man, and he's called the Leatherman of Connecticut, and his never-ending journey. The Leatherman of Connecticut. According to all diary accounts, the Leatherman was first spotted walking through Connecticut on the roads in 1857. From 1857 to 1889, 32 years, he traveled between the Hudson River Valley in New York and the Connecticut River, following the same route with only a few variations over the years, and we'll discuss why. He walked 365 to 366 miles every 34 days. Farmers used to say you could set your clock by the Leatherman. We don't need a calendar, just write down when the Leatherman comes. Now, it is believed the Leatherman was born in 1839, and his name, we really don't know. There are those that believe his name was Jules Bublé or Burglé. He was also thought to have the name Zacharias Bouvelat or Isaac or Isaac. They believe he was French or French-Canadian because he did speak French, but his origins are not known because at the time, though they understood he spoke French, nobody bothered to determine whether it was standard French or French-Canadian. There were myths that grew up over the decades, and they only added to his mystique. The most popular was a tragic love story, and going further, I'm going to refer to him as Jules because I believe that he deserves a name. There was a leather merchant, Monsieur Leron, and Jules fell in love with his beautiful daughter and wanted to marry her. So the agreement with her father was he was to help Monsieur Leron with the leather business, and once he was successful in the leather business, he could marry his daughter. But unfortunately, the next few years, the leather business lost a lot of money. It went bankrupt, and so he was unable to marry his love. And they said that he was put into an asylum for a couple of years in his home country, and then he found himself in the United States. This is when it was believed Jules started his never-ending journey. He stood approximately 5 foot 8 inches tall, wore over 60 pounds of leather, handcrafted clothing made of boot scraps. One elderly woman in the community gave him a brand new pair of leather boots to replace his worn ones. He smiled as thanks, sat down, took out his knife, and carefully cut the leather away from the soles and handed the soles back to the astonished woman, nodded his thanks again, and went on his way. Many in the local communities came to care for him deeply. He never caused any trouble, refused to ever go indoors, refused any offer to stay, even in barns or sheds, no matter the severity of the winters or the harshness of the summer storms. He would approach homes only when needing food or drink. He would accept coffee, brandy, buttermilk, milk, tobacco, and anything the housewives could pack into a sack for him to eat. He had a curious habit of sitting away from the house to eat his food under a tree, never interacting with any of the townsfolk, always polite, pleasant, and respectful, never speaking, and when he was forced to speak by necessity, he spoke French. He found solace by living solitary in caves and in huts and lean-tos that he constructed along his route through the woods and forests in rural Connecticut and New York. Sadly, life wasn't always easy for the Leatherman. Whereas in small towns, he was accepted and considered a charming member or a curiosity of the community that the town folk would look out for, in more rural places and larger cities, he was treated badly. In more rural locations, far from any towns or communities, he was regarded with suspicion and fear. And one year when he traveled through western New Haven County through the town of Southbury, a group of teenagers stopped to follow him and harass him. They stopped him and tried to force him to drink alcohol. He had been written about in several newspapers by this town, and he had become a sort of southern New England celebrity. Like all celebrity, it brings out both the good and the bad. Then came the winter of 1887-1888 and the terrible blizzard in March of 1888. The storm paralyzed the East Coast from the Chesapeake Bay to Maine, with snowfall up to 58 inches from New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Mass. Sustained winds up to 45 miles per hour and snow drifts up to 50 feet. People with homes couldn't leave for over a week. Jules was living in caves for this entire time, also suffering from cancer of the mouth. When he appeared again, his cancer had progressed and he couldn't eat solid food. Caring People had the Humane Society, which was originally created to help the poor and impoverished people like Jules. Took him to Hartford Hospital. They tried to care for him and make him comfortable. He thanked them and he gathered up his belongings and he left. He walked until he found his path again and continued on. The following winter, a farmer and his wife were out walking on their land when they passed by a cave and looked inside. It was March of 1889, and they saw that what they believed was a man asleep inside. It was Jules. He passed away like he lived, alone on his own terms, in the woods as he preferred at the time he chose. The obituary of the Leatherman was in the New York Times on March 25th, 1889. He is buried in Ossing, New York, at Sparta Cemetery. Originally, he was given a beautiful stone with a heavy copper descriptive plate that named him, his supposed place of origin, as Lyon, France, and it said the Leatherman underneath, but it was removed because it hadn't been verified. And now stands this stone with simply the Leatherman. Abhorrently and horribly, the leather suit that he had was put on display and was worn by character actors on the street to scare patrons of a museum, and parents would use the imagery to scare their children into being good. As recently as 1965, a television show filmed in Hartford, Connecticut referred to him as a creature and had the cunning of an animal. Today, 136 years later, we're more advanced, or are we? I grew up on a farm in Colchester back in the day, and I remember asking my father, did we have homeless people in Colchester? And he said, no, back then we didn't. This was back in the 60s and 70s. And I said, really? He says, do you remember Ben and Will? And I said, yeah. They were farm hands that lived on our farm. And he says, because everybody had a farm, there were no homeless people. We would bring them onto the farm, give them a place to live, room and board in the farmhouse, and some of the farms actually had outbuildings. We would feed them, we'd give them clothes, they'd get a paycheck, and they would work on the farm until they retired. And I remember a number of gentlemen that retired off of our farm, and other farms in Colchester were the same. We didn't have homeless back then because we took care of the people that needed jobs and needed a place to stay. So what would you do if Jules was here today, a man who cannot speak English, was hungry, came to your door, not threatening, looking for just a bite of food? Times have changed, but have they changed for the better? Well, thank you for listening to our story tonight and for being here with us on The Magical Alternative and listening to the legends, the myths, and the stories of Connecticut. Thank you. This has been Faith McCann and The Magical Alternative, and I want to thank November Sound. I want to thank the crew of The Magical Alternative. If you would like to ask any questions or write to us, please write to enchantmentsct@gmail.com. And please check out our new website, enchantmentsct.com. Thank you very much. And if it's your dream to be on television and have your own TV show, how do you do it? Contact the public access TV station in your town, have a concept, talk to them, and they'll help you make your show a reality. Thank you so much.